Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to this fourth edition of the Innovation Dialogues. The Dialogues on Innovation are a partnership between Firjan and FAPERJ to debate on many subjects related to innovation. In 2019, we had the first edition of the Dialogues on Innovation. And in 2021, we have a new edition of the event, a new series focusing on international ecosystems of innovation and discussing international cases on innovation. Today's dialogue is placemaking, the challenge of revitalizing cities, and besides our traditional partnership with FAPESP, we today have a partnership with the Sweden Council. For today's dialogue, we have the participation of two speakers that are experts on cities and sustainability and urbanism and planning. So I would like to thank a lot the participation of Matt Ola-Larsson and Washington Fajardo. Matt Ola-Larsson is an environmental expert and project manager in IVL, that is the Swedish Environment Institute in Gothenburg, Sweden, and he works with the sustainable mobility strategies. He deals with electromobility, fuels for vehicles, political instruments and governance requirements, and acquisitions and policies for the environmental impact on transportation. He also participated in a collaboration with Curitiba and IVL from Sweden regarding the Sweden smart cities. He has many projects in Stockholm in Sweden by the institute that he represents, that is the Rehearse Environment Institute. And today the national speaker is Washington Fajardo, the National Secretary of Planning in Rio, architect and president of the Institute of Urbanism, Pereira Passos, and he's a fellow at Harvard ESG. As an architect and urbanism, he concentrated his studies on the viability, making it clear that to create projects for people is to promote and regenerate urban vitality in agreement with the nature. Today's topic, as I mentioned, is placemaking, the challenge to revitalize the cities. That is a broad approach. The COVID-19 pandemic speed up and catalyzed many changes in the cities. Understanding the impact of COVID in the cities and formulating strategies to face the new challenges is therefore mandatory. The pandemics in the 19th century was decisive to push the urbanistic decisions and social decisions. With the huge urbanization of the Industrial Revolution also came many epidemics due to the bad conditions, sanitary conditions of the cities. Epidemics always changed the cities, interrupted process, reinforced trends, and pushing new public policies. As in the past, everything shows that now the same will happen. So identifying and formulating policies to face the new discussions is important. In the current scenario, we have more complexity. If during the Spain called 100 years ago, we had a huge problem to the population, today we have 57% of the population in the big cities. So thinking about policies for them demands well-being of the citizen, and placemaking is planning public spaces with quality to contribute to the welfare of the local community. This concept of placemaking values the live and enjoyable neighborhoods from the opinion of everyone involved in the region. Last week, the intelligence unit of The Economist created the ranking of the safe cities in 2021, classifying 60 cities in 76 indicators grouped in 5 security pillars that are personnel, people, health infrastructure, digital, and environmental. In general, the results of the ranking show that the experience of the pandemic demands a more holistic approach to the sanitary security and its integration in a more straight way with the planning of human resilience. Stockholm is in this rank among the 10 safer cities. Rio can progress in this sense, but in terms of environmental security, we were in 80th place. Behind Stockholm, there was the 7th place. The report shows a correlation in the impacts of COVID-19 and a lot of efforts from the authorities to understand sustainability in the urban means. And these are the cases we want to hear from our speakers in this edition of the Dialogues on Innovation today. After the dialogues, we'll show a video, a synthesis video, with all the main topics discussed in this edition today. All the material will be available in Firjan's YouTube and Instagram at Casa Firjan. And you can access the material of the last 3 editions as well of today's dialogue, bringing cases from Estonia, China, and the Netherlands. Feel free to to bring questions and doubts in the chat, and we'll open the space for debate in the end of the event. Okay? Matt, please.
What's your thoughts on these topics? You're muted.
Of course I'm muted. Hello everyone, and sorry for that. I'm very pleased to be able to share with you some of the experiences in Sweden. I'm working at an IVL, Swedish Environmental Research Institute, and I'm going to give you some examples of sustainable transports in Sweden. I will share my presentation with you or Firjan afterwards if you want to access it in afterwards. So I will try to share my presentation now. And I will just open, yeah, you can see my slideshow now. No, you can't. I see myself now, so maybe I will have to make this one more time. There you are. So I'm a part of the Smart City Sweden, which is a platform for cooperation and sustainable city solutions in Sweden. There's a wide range of actors. It's coordinated by the Swedish Energy Agency, and it's managed by IVL, Swedish Environmental Research Institute, where I work. And you can read more about this if you want to afterwards. Now, I want to give you some examples of how we work, which is Swedish examples. You will hear much from Gothenburg, the second biggest city in Sweden, where I mainly work. But the examples are also used in many parts of Sweden. So it's just that I have got the best pictures from my hometown, Gothenburg. And my first theme is about space. This is an example of what we do in Sweden. It's a walking speed street regulation, you can call it. You see the sign in the middle, and it means that you are allowed to drive with all vehicle types in this area on the streets, but you must drive only in pedestrian speed, so to say, which is quite slow, isn't it? And you must not park except for short stops for deliverances, etc. And as you see in the picture here, which is representative for these kind of streets, the pedestrians feel free to use the space. So this is a way of prioritizing children, elderly, cyclists, workers who are there to work in their office or visit a restaurant or whatever. But you have accessibility with car and lorries and transportation as well. Here you have a picture of a walking speed street from Gothenburg. The picture above is how it looked before it was arranged as a walking speed street. And as you can see, pedestrians are restricted to the sidewalk, while the distribution lorry have to park in the middle of the way, since all the parking spaces are blocked with cars, and maybe someone is shopping or working at the office and park their car there. after the change, you can see the picture at the bottom, and there is a huge change in accessibility. But and especially the commercial transports are much easier, since you can go there with a lorry, you can stop where you need to stop and deliver the goods. One interesting thing with this is that surveys were made, and actually the shop owners, restaurants, and the offices situated there are quite pleased, because they understand it's better accessibility for customers, employees, and so on. Another example is a rebuilt street from Gothenburg. And this is also a trend in many bigger cities in Sweden today, since we are, just as you mentioned in Brazil, we are getting more people in the same space. In this place, I've got no before picture. This is the after picture, so to say. The change here, before there were broader car lanes, you were allowed to drive in a higher speed limit, and there were no bicycle lanes. By rebuilding the street, you use the same space in a different way. So, and the key factor here is lowering speed at the car speed. Because if you lower the speed, people feel more free to cross the street, to let their children walk or bicycle in the street. And by separating walking and biking, you feel more safe as a cyclist or a pedestrian, since you don't meet each other. Before, you had to use a shared space and much less space. So this trend in reusing the same space is mainly, you get accessibility, but you get more accessibility for more groups, so to say. And but you still have accessibility for cars. But since it's less attractive to go here by car, you kind of prioritize. You go here if you must, if you live there and have a parking place there, but you don't take this road just by chance if in case you find a place to park, because it takes time to go there. Another example, and this is quite new in Sweden, is a cycle speed street regulation. The thought is quite similar, and it is, before you had to bicycle at the right side and watch out for cars passing you. But the rebuilt process here makes it more natural to bicycle in the middle of the road, and the cars are obliged to drive at cycle speed and take care and to the bicyclists. And by doing this, you get a higher accessibility for bicyclists and a bit lower speed. It's not much difference, but a bit lower speed from the cars. And by that, it's also more safe to be there as a pedestrian, elderly, children, etc. And also here they made service, because this special street you see in the picture was actually the first in Sweden. This was a trial. So they made service before and after among bicyclists, walking persons, and car owners. And actually a majority find it better. They understand this is a way of making it more safe for all groups. You feel safe, you know what to do here. And it's the same thing about space here. We have limited space. If you had a lot of space, you would have built a separate bicycle lane. When you can't do it, you have to prioritize. And as I said, this is a new regulation, so it's a kind of a trend in Sweden. And And I think it reflects a kind of changing attitude towards cars and pedestrian and bicyclists in the city. It's impossible to build roads for all the cars, so it's more accepted today to make it a more safe mixture, so to say. Another question about space is an example here. The picture is from Aberdeen in Scotland, where I was 1 year ago. And this is very common in Swedish cities as well. You use space for car sharing. And the principle is that the municipality reserves parking for car sharing. That makes it easier to live and work without owning a car in the area. And one car sharing car replaces approximately 5 private cars is shown in many research projects throughout Europe. And of course, a person who uses a car all the time can't use car sharing cars. That would be no use at all. It would just be expensive. So this is focusing on people who needs a car now and then in holiday time, for instance, or in the after work or weekends. And then you have accessibility to a car, but you don't have to buy one. So this is a way of reducing the amount of cars in a city without making it impossible to use a car for those who are satisfied with sharing. And this is another short example. If you make it possible to lock your bike at the public transport nodes, it's more attractive to bike. And I want to summarize this first part in this policy context. If you want to do this strategy, you have to have a policy. And this is a picture of the Gothenburg traffic strategy, which has this focus I have given some examples of. You focus on accessibility for all groups. You focus on environmental and sustainable issues, and you focus on equity. And by doing so, you have a base for doing many things. My next theme, just shortly, is about public transport. And I'm not an expert in public transport. I will just tell you what the experts tell me, or what we do in Sweden, what is a trend right now. If you ask yourself, what can public transport compete with car commuters? How can we do that? And what they focus on is higher capacity rather than lower fares. They focus on major commuter corridors where most of the cars travel. And they focus on speed and reliability in the public transport. If the purpose is that a higher share of car owners shall be attracted to public transport, this is the way to do it, because you compete with time, not with money. People who can afford to buy and use a car, they are attracted by public transport if they find it time attractive. That is, if you don't lose too much time by going by public transport. This is the main issue for public transport, when you will compete with a car. And this is made by separate bus lanes. 2 examples here, because buses and cars compete for road space. You can do it by arranging commuter parking close to public transport hubs and along the major commuter corridors. And that makes it easier to combine your trip with your own car where you live and continue with public transport, for instance, to your work. My third theme is mobility services. And I will give you one example, also from Gothenburg. I've been working with this specific project. But this is very common in the bigger cities of Sweden, this kind of attitude, which I'm going to present now. Imagine the estate owner want to build more houses, which is the case in the picture here. You want to minimize the need for parking because building parking lots is expensive, it takes space. In this specific picture, actually, they use part of the parking lots existing here. This is a picture from above where you see the parking lots in the middle. But the need for parking is general when you build because it lowers the cost. And to do this, it's a trend now to combine efficient parking fees, and that is, it shouldn't be too cheap because then you have an overuse of cheap car parking, so to say. And you combine that with mobility services like carpool and rental bike, and information, local incentives, etc. This is a picture of car sharing where you see some buildings in the background. They have both residents and companies, and they have a variety of cars to choose between. It makes it easier to live and work there without car. At the left, you see electric cars, in the middle, a normal passenger car, and a van at the right. This is also interesting for home deliverances. It's a strong trend. People are buying more and more at internet and get it delivered at home. And to meet this, the real estate owners establish delivery boxes. It should be open to different suppliers. And this makes it easier for residents and business to avoid car use, since you get the parcels home efficiently. I will just talk something about money as well. And this is essential, and it's underused in many Swedish municipalities, but it's growing in importance. And the thing is, the level of parking fees in residential areas will influence strongly the share of inhabitants that choose to buy a car. It's well shown in research and experiences throughout Sweden. And the level of parking fees close to workplaces will influence the share of car owners that drive their car to work. So by adapting a smart parking policy, you can lower the share of inhabitants that choose to buy a car or use your car and go by other transport modes now and then. I think I stopped there because I don't want to talk too much now, so we have time for discussion. I have some more examples, but I think I pause there. What do you say about that?
Thank you, Mats. Thank you so much for your presentation. Brilliant. We'll open the floor for questions. A gente vai depois falar das perguntas mais para o final. E agora com a palavra, por favor, o...
Pass on the floor to Washington Fajardo. Thank you very much, Antônio, Matt. Obrigado pela apresentação. And now I will share my screen. Can you see my presentation? Can you see it, Antônio? No, not yet. You're frozen here to me. Can you see my screen? Can you tell me, Antonio? No, no, we can't see your screen. Your image is frozen. Can someone give me a feedback if you can see my screen? Can someone give me a feedback? I don't know if it's my internet here. I don't know. I'll try again, let's see. But I would like your feedback if someone can tell me if it's okay or not. Yeah, they are saying that they can see. Let's try once again. Can you see my screen, my presentation? I'm sorry, Secretary. The image here is not good. Can you? No, you're frozen to us. Okay, so let's go without presentation. I apologize. The point I would like to make here is, in my presentation, is that placemaking is a very broad concept and is of special value when it implies the possibility of interaction between society, designers, in the sense of architecture, architects and designers and governments. And this moment we are living in, that is still the lockdown context, this pandemic context, it has such a trend of creating a perception that the collaboration process among people to improve the city is not viable because of the pandemic. So what I was going to show you was the process and what we did. And I had special interest in showing that to Matt and show him that we are today quite dedicated to giving flexibility of soil use in the central area of Rio. That is an area that we have exclusive use of offices, office building, and a business area. So we are working on that, and there is a legislation on that. There is a scope of work constituted to allow this area to have more residential work. And this process started in the beginning of this year and started in still in the context of the pandemic and the quarantine, but we used digital resources like platforms of public consultation and public surveys in such a way to contribute, and which showed that based on the digital platforms we could amplify the engagement and participation process. So we could, with this process, have more than 8,000 people enrolled and participating in the discussion of this process that is called Reviver Centro. Naturally, there were also presential meetings, and this is what I was going to show you with my presentation. Showing the meetings with the residents and the civil society and the business owners downtown, and this work that we are carrying out to improve the public space. So the first message I would like to bring is that placemaking as a process of interaction and dialogue, it is viable in the digital environment. I'm not saying here that there is no need of presential meetings. No, they are important. But it seems to me that there is a need for us to break this prejudice with the participation process in the digital environment. And I also believe, and this is an experience that we took to the review of the director plan of the city, where we created technological solutions and collaborative design. That is, people can enter the internet environment via an app and design solutions in the digital environment. So I would like to make it clear that I'm not complimenting the digital environment, but I'm saying that we need to open our understanding about our ways of interacting, where the digital solutions can amplify the participation process and not reduce the participation process. So I think this is the first point I would like to make. And the second one is that regarding placemaking, it is also important for us to talk about the conservation process and the maintenance of the public spaces. Many times the solutions give the kickoff, the starting point of the intervention of this placemaking, and in this sense they not necessarily consider the long term. That is, the placemaking process is interactive with the civil society, making use of more creative resources to produce the urban transformation. And this is a very valuable tool. However, it seems to me that is important for us to think in long term. So it's very interesting, and I think we could see that in Matt's presentation. I mean, the importance of public policy, what we imagine based on the placemaking as a solution. So that placemaking doesn't become, as many times it happens and it's misunderstood, a simplest solution of punctual intervention or intervention in the short term without considering the long-term transformation. So many times we observe that regarding the contribution of arts for the transformation of public spaces. So many times we consider the intervention like graffiti or mural arts or small maintenance of public spaces as they are the final result. And my point here is that they are the starting point of the process. And the faster interventions, they have to trigger the longer transformation process. And it seems to me very important so that people can establish their trust to the process of this transformation. If the transformation process is always a short process or is always a process that happens on the weekends and so on, or is an eventual process, it ends up having the contrary results, that is, not trusting this transformation process. So it brings a very bad effect, because every time we call society, we invite society to this placemaking process, they don't believe the process anymore, because the memory they have is the solutions that start and finish. So it seems to me very important that we need to organize time for placemaking. So if it starts fast and creative and punctual, it needs then to have continuity. And many times I can see that this continuity is not considered in the placemaking processes. Many times brands, companies, institutions, they are interested at first, but they are not interested later on. And it's very important so that people can trust the transformation process. So these are the messages I would like to make. I couldn't show my presentation, but I guess I could explain that the first point is the digital environment being very interesting for the participative placemaking processes. And the second point of my message has to do with the continuous process. If the process is fast, society ends up not believing the procedures for the placemaking. So it's very important for us to ensure experiences, and here I'm using experience and not intervention as the word. For the long term, I mean, the public space must result in trust in the long-term use of the public space. This is my message, and I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you very much, Secretary. Thank you, Washington, for your presentation. I would like to thank Matt and Washington Fajardo for the explanations, and also thank our audience here today. We have many people watching, and we have Leon Melo from the Ecological Park from the Federal University, Leo Melo from Petrópolis, and many other people watching us. And we would also like to thank International Firjan for the partnership to have this dialogue working, and they helped us a lot in that. And regarding your points, I think that you both had very complementary presentations. Matt mentioned the policy context and talked about the transports and very interesting cases for us to know, and initiatives that we can see in many cities there in Europe, and strategies like public policies demanding, as Washington Fajardo mentioned, some longer time for the continuity. And it's very interesting what we can see in Rio regarding the digital use, incorporating the digital use to this process of placemaking and structuring placemaking, with this digital environment working to hear the contributions of the population and to structure the cases. So I would like to start here with points that are coming from the audience. And one first point I would like to mention is regarding the cities. How can we, as the subject is placemaking, so how can we revalue and determine green areas or certain spaces in the city according to your understanding? So what are the policies for that? Matt, if you can start, please.
Because tem um índice, mais um índice, né, de smart cities, que mostra
showing that Stockholm very well placed in this big city, like the biggest city in Sweden, and it can be well evaluated in terms of infrastructure. So I would like to know your opinion on that.
I have two spontaneous thoughts, and Washington Fajardo mentioned the value of giving time for the process. And we have a discussion in Sweden right now. When you want to build more, we build more roads, more houses than a few years ago. And many of the construction companies who wants to do this fast, they complain on the process because it takes time. You know, we have a democratic process where you shall present it for the public. You should give them time to have to say what they think about a new plan, for instance, building houses. And then the politics shall discuss this, decide, and finally you can start building. A discussion in Sweden is very common that we think it takes too long time. And what you pronounce, Washington, is if you lose people, engagement during this process, you will lose in the end very much more than you win, because you have to have, you must make all these decisions together with the groups influenced, and also the groups who are not so used to say what they, you know, they're not economically strong or used to speak in public. And the other thing I thought about is the example you mentioned about the new digital possibilities to let people say what they think and contribute in a complementary way, not as the only way, but as a complement to the traditional papers and meetings. And we are just trying to learn that in Sweden. I talked with a city planner in another city last week, and she told us we have a planning process where we opened for digital meetings. We haven't done that before. We did it because it's COVID. We find it much better. We got, it's not the usual suspects telling us what we already knew they would say. We meet much more of our citizens and groups. So I think you've really stressed that you have to consider this as a long-term process, and I think we don't really know how to do it, but we're trying to learn.
Obrigado, Matos. O Gustavo Guimarães reforça esse ponto que você colocou, que o Washington falou também. O Gustavo Guimarães fala que as políticas públicas no Brasil, e principalmente nas cidades, não possuem continuidade, né? Isso é muito grave aí para esse processo que a gente está vendo. Tem uma outra pergunta aqui do José Luiz Barbosa, que é mais ampla, né? Mais focada, acho que os dois podem responder, talvez, com que tipo de conhecimento pode ser transferido da Suécia para o Rio de Janeiro para ajudar o desenvolvimento do centro do Rio de Janeiro. Aí, enfim, como vocês dois têm essa visão mais ampla, podendo começar talvez pelo Matos, depois a palavra com o Fajardo, por favor, para as considerações.
Yeah, of course, I will answer very quickly. I think that our experience of how to get acceptance and to include different groups in the process, we have started that transformation. I'm not certain that we are much better than you on that, but the experience we have got, which I mentioned, to include groups that are not that voice loud, so to say, because car owners, I don't mean they are bad as persons. I mean, it's a powerful group because you've got more money and better education than the poor ones, people moving into our country from another country, and to include these groups in different processes and to express their needs in terms of space, traffic security, and so on. We can transfer our experiences and mix them with yours.
Eu acho que posso falar, Antônio?
Por favor.
Acho que essa é uma questão muito interessante. Como alguém dedicado à história.
One dedicated to the history of the cities, I think that the struggles, the urban struggles of the European cities in the 70s had a great impact in the 80s in Brazil, when we started the democratic period here. I don't know if Matt knows the history here, but until the beginning of the 80s, we were living a military dictatorship, and we left that to democracy in 85 with the elections. And it's very interesting because back then, it was a moment to rebuild the democracy in the country, and it was also a moment of a lot of investments and a search for producing a good urban scale in the historical centers of the Brazilian cities, and it was really influenced by the experience in Europe. So many cities like São Paulo, Rio, Salvador, they tried to take cars away from the central areas and create the downtown region for the human beings. So it seems to me that there is something that we could do, and I've studying a lot on that. We could benefit a lot from knowing the housing policies. The household policies in Brazil, they are still from the production of creating big buildings in distant areas. We don't have, for example, policies for affordable houses like in many European cities. We still don't have financial solutions on the market, and the retrofitting and reforms and constructions, this is something that is not well spread in Brazil. I'm talking in the scale of a country. In Rio, we are trying to start that, and we have this plan for downtown Rio, and this is what we are trying to give more incentives to reform, start before building new things. So the idea is that this reform is also producing a city with a low carbon, and recycling a building is also producing an urban experience that is more environmentally adequate to the challenges that we have now. And from the point of view of micromobility, there is some understanding in Rio of the role of the bikes. I think that this is an essential mode of transportation. However, given the characteristics of the landscape in Rio, many times the roads in Rio are still very scenic. They are thinking about tourism and not necessarily transportation. But also in the context of downtown Rio, we have this plan of increasing the presence of bicycles as a mode of transportation. So that's it. We are used of seeing bikes at the beach, but we need bikes everywhere, helping people to go from one side to the other. And this is a challenge considering our weather as well. We are finishing the winter here, and we have 25, 28, 30 degrees Celsius here during winter. So we need comfort for bikes in this sense. But when we look to the peripheries of the cities, we see that this is a mode that is quite representative. And to give some idea of numbers to you, somehow mobility in Rio is 1/3 by walking, 1/3 by car, and 1/3 of high capacity transportation. Perfect, Washington. Thank you very much. And there is a question on the chat about mobility from Jorge Rossi from Firjan International, and he is asking, Farjado, if based on the positive experience of Rio, of bike sharing, Do we have studies to complement with a car sharing, with electric vehicles and recharge spaces to reduce the fleet for urban displacement? Well, these are solutions that are still depending on the private sector a lot. It seems to me that's the problem, but from the point of view of being quite attentive to the idea of curbside management or the curbside economy, that is, the public space doesn't have the contemplative function as it was in the 19th century. The public space is more and more a platform of economical functions and circulation and even job production. So just to give another idea to Matt, to make it clear, like for example, the delivery boys, all the personnel working on that, they are an economic part that is very important in Brazilian cities. So, but however, our capacity of monitoring and managing the parking spots and the modes of micromobility is still a challenge for us to work. We are trying to prioritize that downtown Rio so that it can be a pilot experience and help the development in the other parts of the city. I think the greatest difference of the Latin American and European experience is that we still consider the expansion process of the cities as a natural process. And in Europe, the cities implement for a long time some control on the expansion process and some efficacy on the soil use that is still a challenge to us. Perfect, Washington. Thank you. There is a comment here from Gustavo Guimarães mentioning that the revitalization of the cities shouldn't be thought only for big urban centers, but also for neighborhoods where the poor population is. So these two pillars are important. I mean, the big urban centers and the poor areas. And regarding this discussion, Julia Zardo comments and makes a question to both of you regarding the public schools. Can they be used in Brazil as a space for meetings in areas that you don't have infrastructure? Do you have this experience in Sweden? Matt, if you can start. So regarding this discussion of public schools as
the public schools in Sweden are used as a meeting place. For instance, many organizations like sport organizations, music organizations are used. That you use it as a place for meeting after school for the informal sector, the neighborhood, the organizations living in the neighborhood. That we have a long experience of. If that was the answer of the question, I hope I understood it roughly right. Did I?
Yes.
I think that Matt's point is very interesting for us to think this about this idea of his connection is bad, but I mean the collective building, the space for community exchange. And it's very interesting because we see that the spaces are much more common in the informal areas of the city than in the formal spaces of the city. The presence, for example, and I will again use history. I'm sorry if I'm teasing you, but for example, in the urban struggles, the organizations using churches as environments for discussion was very important for the urban discussions in Brazil. However, it has changed, and today we see in the informal territories like the slums, favelas, how we have sports courts or the samba schools and the cultural spaces working much more as protagonists for community spaces. And Julia's point is very interesting because, in fact, the presence of schools in Rio is important. We have more than 1,000 public schools in the city. I guess 1,030 public schools. So this is a network that could have a community function in a very relevant way. So this is very interesting. This is something that we should discuss more and progress more on this concept of a network of community spaces. Yeah, Fajardo, very good. And there is a comment from Renan saying that he worked on a 3G project for the revitalization of a public area in Rio to increase the social inclusion of people with difficulties. So how can we take this project from the paper and make it viable, considering that it should be a legacy benefiting people from many generations? So Matt, if you have any comments on how working on projects with a 3D printing to work in the cities in Sweden, and then Washington comments. Well, I think the point here is very interesting. How the projects of citizens can be official projects. And this is an interesting question so that we can make to Matt how solutions coming directly from the citizens can be incorporated. I don't know if you can comment briefly on that with your experience in Sweden.
Okay, I will make a try. We have a long tradition of supporting civil society. You mentioned the church, I mentioned sport organizations, and many more. I think that the experience is you have some organization, the municipality has a role to facilitate that. And in times of when you prioritize money, you have to formulate the value of giving these civil organizations possibilities to work parallel with all the commercial organization, the political system. And the experience from Sweden is, I think, my experience is this is a way of making democracy more solid, because you include people, and we have major problems in some areas where it has arrived many citizens from other countries due to they are refugees from war and so on. And if you don't give them a chance to come into the society, you have a parallel society, and we are really struggling. So we have a very old, very long experience of including our old institutions like the churches or the civil organizations, but we have not very long tradition of including the new citizens in our society, and we are trying to do that. So I think that what you have mentioned as some examples also from Brazil is valid, but I don't think I have very much to teach you there.
Okay, perfect. So thank you, Matt. So we are in our final moments in this dialogue. We have other questions here, but unfortunately we don't have time. So I would just like to thank a lot for your participation, and I would like your final words if you want to comment on something on placemaking and revitalizing cities, if you want to make a last comment to our audience here, everyone following us. So first Washington, then Matt. Well, I would just like to thank and apologize for my bad connection. I've mentioned the digital environment as a mode, but this digital environment needs to improve a lot, as you can see. But I think that in the end, we search for a better public space, and it means necessarily the search for better means of communication and interaction. So we need to use all tools available to us. So it was a pleasure to hear Matt and watch his presentation, and I thank Firjan for the invitation.
Likewise, it has been very nice to listen to you and to be invited here. And as a final comment, I would like to say that I hope you don't think I know how you should manage your city or your country, because I don't. I know there are big differences in economic power, or what you can call it, but we have discussed today the importance of transparent processes, democratic including the groups that have to be included and are easily forgotten. And there I think we have a process that we can learn from each other. We have certain experiences which I've shared with you today, and that was just to mention these that I wanted to share them with you. I think we have got good experiences, but I also hope you understood that we are struggling this fight also in Sweden. You have to see the easily forgotten groups and the long democratic processes, and then we have discussed today some ways of meeting in the political process, in space, in schools, and so on. I think it has been very thoughtful and interesting. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank a lot for Matt All and Washington Farjad's participation. It was a very rich discussion that will be later on worked, compiled, and made available in Firjan's channels as a way of summarizing everything and for us to have some visual summary. Once again, thank you very much and see you next time.
A Casa Firjan é um espaço comprometido em refletir e criar proposições e soluções aos desafios da nova economia em uma sociedade em transformação. Temos o compromisso de pensar no futuro e facilitar o caminho de profissionais, lideranças e sociedade para quando ele chegar. A FAPERJ é uma agência de fomento à ciência, à tecnologia e à inovação do Estado do Rio de Janeiro. Sua missão é contribuir para o estabelecimento de condições favoráveis ao desenvolvimento social. O Diálogos da Inovação é uma série de encontros da Firjan em parceria com a FAPERJ para discutir sobre ambientes de inovação. Seu objetivo é incrementar o ecossistema de inovação brasileiro, criando pontos de encontro e convergência para diferentes atores: governo, empresas, academia, startups, instituições de pesquisa e terceiro setor. Tudo isso para debater o futuro do Rio e do Brasil, observando cases de sucesso nacionais e internacionais. Em 2019, realizamos 8 edições dos Diálogos com foco em cases de ecossistemas de inovação nacionais. Agora, em 2021, a série aborda iniciativas e exemplos de ecossistemas internacionais de inovação com especialistas internacionais e debatedores brasileiros.